Hello everyone, it's Olivia here, aka Story Minded, and I'm going to make the next video updating you on my sort of assignments that I've had for this year. The next one I'm going to talk about is my Telling Tales assignment, where we had to write two pieces of poetry. It was like a mini poetry portfolio, and we had to do a ballad and an epic poem. The ballad had to be either 10 or 11 verses, and that's like the 4 quatrains that they're traditionally written in, although we could play with the form and stuff like that. And the epic had to be 50 or 55 lines. And I really enjoyed learning about these two forms of poetry a lot more. Like, back in college, we touched on ballads in creative writing, but we attempted to write. I'm not even gonna. Oh, I remember the one that I wrote in college, and it was awful. It was so bad. But they're very. It was really good to learn about them in more detail and to actually gain an appreciation of ballads and understand sort of their purpose and why they were created and who they were for, and they're really fun. And I highly recommend if any of you are into sort of like folk music or folk music or traditional sort of songs, look up Little Musgrave. That's it's brilliant. That's a really good ballad that's sort of got a cheeky side to it, but it's very tragic, and it's a very powerful ballad. So for my ballad, originally I was going to write a modern ballad, or I was going to keep the ballad form, but I was going to write about a modern issue. I was going to write about the state of the education system and things like that. But as I was working on it, although I was happy with it, I just felt like ballads are meant to be a bit more bawdy. They're meant to be a bit more scandalous and about not so pleasant things, and I just felt like it wasn't powerful enough. I think it would have been powerful, but in a different kind of for something different rather than my university submission. So I postponed that one, and I ended up writing about the Ballad of Burke and Hare, because there was a period in history where ballads were sold as, I think they're called broadsheets, and basically you would go to a public execution and like a hanging, something like that, and you would be able to buy broadsheets, these mini ballads that people had written about the person who was going to be executed. And it's like almost like the tabloids of today. That's what ballads were. They could be news reporters as well, and you would get like you pay for like a souvenir of like a snapshot of their life in this ballad form. So I ended up doing some research on Burke and Hare, William Burke and William Hare, the two, they grave robbers, but they weren't actually Victorian grave robbers. They were murderers. They were serial killers. They killed people and tried to pass it off as if they were robbing them from graves. And I can't remember if they might have actually robbed one grave at least, but I think they were mainly murderers. And I thought, when I was reading and researching them, the more I read, the more I realised their lives just fit the ballad format perfectly. They're just everything that you would want in a ballad. So I had a lot of fun writing the Ballad of Burke and Hare, and just playing with the idea of imagery and just trying to bring them to life in their story. But I kind of also fictionalized it, because that the real story is that Hare, I believe it was Hare, managed to get away scot-free because the police, they got caught, and the police basically went to him, "You won't hang if you're willing to testify against your friend." And basically he did. He turned on his best friend. They'd been in on it together, and he was like, "Oh yeah, he denied everything." And it was only, I can't remember what happened to the women. I don't think the women they were with were hung, but Burke definitely was. So I just thought that kind of betrayal idea that runs through ballads, I thought that would be perfect to use. So at the end of mine, I kind of fictionalised it by having I had Hare tip off the police. So as Burke is digging up their latest kill, the policeman comes along and catches him. So that was fun. And then the epic I wrote, epics are a lot different. Epics don't tend to rhyme, and it's like iambic pentameter they're usually written in, which is really hard. I played with the iambic pentameter in mine a lot, which we were allowed to do, so I actually tried to fit the rhythm for the line, so I would break it and play with it, and it was really challenging, but I'm really proud of myself for managing to hopefully pull it off. I don't know the grades for that yet, so I don't know how I've done. But it's quite handy because when I went for, well, I didn't go for a tutorial, I went for a seminar, but no one had turned up except for me. And my lecturer was there, and he was like, well, you're here, you might as well just have a one-to-one tutorial. So I was like, okay, and I showed him sort of my drafts that I was working on, and I'd already had like a kind of, he offered me a tutorial with my creative writing assignments. I tend not to want to go for tutorials, just because I'll send my work, like my first draft through to them to get feedback from my lecturers, but I just tend to not want to go to a tutorial setting for that, because I just feel like I'd rather get the feedback and be able to work on it myself rather than having to sort of discuss it, if that makes sense. I don't know why, that's just sort of my preference, I guess. And then I'd sent them, and my lecturer said, why don't you come in for like a tutorial? So I went for my first tutorial, and then he gave me really good feedback that I used to improve them. And then this was sort of the second time he saw them after quite a long time, and he gave me really, really good praise for it, and hopefully I've done quite well on them. But the back to the epic, I wrote the Epic of Catherine, and it's about this former lady called Catherine who ran away with who she thought was this amazing war hero, like this crusader, but and she's left pregnant, and she's alone in like this little cottage, and this cattleman's wife comes along to assist her with the birth, but her baby is deformed. And because what mainly inspired my epic was the folklore of changelings that we'd learnt about like the previous sort of semester for like the first assignment, although I didn't use that type of folklore for my first assignment. I was just really interested in the kind of folklore behind changelings. So she believes that her deformed baby is a changeling, and she ends up murdering it by leaving it, well, she leaves it for dead. She leaves it in the woods for the wolves, and as she's going back to town, she sees her crusader, her lover, who's meant to be away at war, stumbling out of a tavern drunk, and she just realises her mistake. She's just, overwhelmed with like the horror of what she's done, and the ending bit is she's running back through the woods to try and get her baby, but all that's left is like horsehair blanket, like strips of it have just been shredded, and there's just no sign of her baby. And it kind of leaves it on like a sort of rhetorical question, because when we were learning about epics, they're meant to be about like enlightenment, and they were more refined. They were for like the gentry and the noblemen and the noblewomen as a form of entertainment for them. So they're meant to be a lot more philosophical and profound, and whereas the ballads are meant to be for the working class, and they're meant to be like cheeky and bawdy and like scandalous and sex and all that kind of stuff for ballads. So I kind of leave it with a question of like, what fool was she to trade new life for death, and kind of this whole sort of idea, leaving it on that. But I really enjoyed the difference between these two poems, and I really enjoyed telling two completely different stories, and I had a lot of fun just sort of creating them. And as this video is getting long anyway, I might as well move on to the Telling Tales assignment 3. So we also had to do, along with this, it was like an evaluative statement, and we could choose any piece of work from the module, but I decided to talk about my ballad, and for my evaluative statement it was only like 500 words we could do. I think we were allowed the 10% over, I can't remember. Anyway, we'll find out. And it's just like a bit of supportive evidence, so I just mainly looked at the research I did for the Ballad of Burke and Hare, and kind of just talked about my creative writing process in relation to the research, and kind of what inspired certain lines and things like that. Anyway, if anyone's watched this, thank you. And if you're at uni or you're about to start, or you're starting uni in September, good luck with everything, and I hope you enjoy the experience. Bye.